Interruption. Okay, so welcome everyone. Just a few housekeeping rules. If you joined us, please write your name and your organization in the chat. And we kindly ask that you keep your microphone muted so as to avoid disruptions. We are recording this webinar for purposes of those who can join us, but also for the future. Today is International Youth Day. All over the world is celebrating the youth. And really the topic for this year is green skills for the youth towards a sustainable world. I think we all know that due to global warming, due to unusual weather patterns, due to so many natural disasters and calamities caused by things that are caused by man and also things that are inevitable, our planet is warming up, our climate is changing, and there is really a move towards a sustainable world for the future, and youth are the future of the world. So today our focus is going to be on a very important topic, emotional intelligence for leadership, but also we want to acknowledge and create a space to start a discussion about green skills for the youth. So thank you for joining us, and wherever you are, please put your name and your location as well as your organizational affiliation in the chat. And with that introduction, we're going to move on to the next item on the agenda, which is a wellness minute. Can we move to the next slide, please? Next slide, please. So we'll be having our wellness minute. Dorcas, can we have the previous slide, please? Next slide. So today we're going to just take a minute to get in touch with ourselves and emotions so that we are alert and aware about how we feel. So let's take a few minutes to reflect on how we are feeling right now, because every minute of the day we are in one of three zones based on our stress level. So it's a Saturday morning and you may be highly stressed, which means you're in a red zone. If you're feeling anxious, if you're feeling frustrated, if you're feeling alarmed or afraid, you are in a red zone. And that means that you're feeling kind of stressed. Or you may be disengaged, you're tired, distracted, bored, and routine. If you're feeling disengaged or if you're feeling highly stressed, it's important that you pay attention to how you're feeling and bring yourself back to what we call the green zone, which is to regulate your emotions so that you are present, you're alert, you're excited and relaxed so that you can pay attention. If you're highly stressed, it means that your thinking takes place in what they call your primitive mind, and it will lower your IQ, making it difficult for you to engage and work with others. So take a minute to think about where your mind is right now. If you're feeling stressed, if you're feeling disengaged, do something to bring yourself back into that green relaxed zone so that you can be present as we go through the next 1 hour, 20 minutes. So a few things you can do is take a deep breath, breathe in and then breathe out maybe 2 or 3 times, or you can relax your muscles, just kind of sense how your muscles are feeling and try to just relax your body. Or you can stand up if you're seated, just pay attention to how you feel and do something to bring yourself back. Other things you can do is think of a happy thought, think of somebody who makes you happy, think of a joke, think of something funny, just bring yourself back into the room so that you're present and you're engaged for the next 1 hour or so. So that was our wellness minute to raise awareness about how we feel and to just kind of practice how to get back into a focused and engaged mindset. Okay, so our next topic is just to shed some light on International Youth Day. Our topic for today, for International Youth Day, green skills for youth towards a sustainable world. So as we move towards the green economy, we wanted to create some space, a few minutes to start a discussion about green skills for the youth. What we want to do today is just to raise awareness about what green skills are, how relevant they are, and highlighting the central role of the young people in the green transition. We also want to provide some knowledge and information necessary to understand the importance of green skills for young people. And then we want to showcase some practices that can nurture the development of green skills among the young people. So we do have a few videos that we want to share today to talk about the green skills and just to kind of get young people to think about whether they have the skills and the knowledge and the attitudes to promote a sustainable world. So can we go to the next slide, please? So the green economy is emerging in different areas, whether it be in renewable energy, in farming, electric vehicles, forestry, manufacturing processes. The world is moving towards towards a sustainable economy, the green economy. I think most of us are now familiar with that. But let's also take a minute to think about how each of us is contributing towards that or not contributing towards that. Are we aware that we really need to reduce the effects of climate change on the world so as to preserve our planet for our future generations? And the youth, as the young people, the future generations who are going to carry on after the rest of us, really need to be thinking about this because they are the ones who are going to be affected most by the effects of climate change. So the world today is highlighting the importance of the youth having the knowledge, having the skills and the attitudes to promote the green transition as the world moves towards a green economy. So I'm going to share a video that was developed by the United Nations. And this video kind of highlights what green skills is and why it's important for the youth to be involved in the green economy. And I'm going to ask that if you're not speaking, please mute your microphone. Mute your microphone so that we can all listen to this video. So I'm going to take a few minutes to share my screen and so green skills, the knowledge, abilities, and values and attitudes needed to live in a green world. Youth, you are the heart of the green transition.
We can't see the video.
Oh, you can't see the video?
No.
Oh, sorry about that. So, Dorcas, I'm going to share my screen. I think. Dorcas, if you could kindly stop the share so I can share the screen, that would be helpful.
All right, let me do that.
Okay, so I will share my screen. Hopefully the technology will be on our side.
I think we have some people not on mute.
They jumped into a what? A river. But dogs
Dorcas,
actually.
can you mute yourself, and Richard also, please mute yourself. Thank you.
I'm going to ask that if you're not speaking, please mute the microphone.
So, with the use of the pencil, we use, and one has some remember that one there is display, then after the role is the last thing.
So can you all see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay.
Yes, you can.
Okay. So green skills for the youth. Green skills, the knowledge, abilities, values, and attitude needed to live, develop, and support a green economy.
Not moving.
So unfortunately, we're unable to share the video. I think I'm going to just put the video in the chat and really speak to it. While I'm going to put it in the chat so that if you are able to, you can always view it at a later date. But I'm going to just kind of share the screen and speak to what the video is saying. So knowledge, skills, abilities needed to develop and support a sustainable world. The youth at the heart of the green transition. Youth need to understand the impacts of climate change, and that green transition will positively impact young people with emerging economic opportunities. The world faces a skills shortage. 60% of young people will lack the skills needed to work in a green economy, and gender occupational stereotypes are further making skill gaps. So those are some of the facts about the green transition. We really need the youth to think about developing the skills and getting an interest in the green transition, because the future of the world revolves around the green economy. So with that, I think due to the technical difficulties of sharing the video, I'm going to post them in the chat or share them in a separate space. And I think at this point we can transition into the main presentation for today, which is our presentation on emotional intelligence for leadership roles.
Okay, that's me. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining this session on emotional intelligence. I hope everyone can hear me clearly. Dorcas, if you can share the slides, please.
All right, let me do that.
Okay, no, if you go back one slide. Yeah, so we're going to be talking about emotional intelligence for effective leadership. My name is Lilian Kiapi. I work as Director for Health Country Support at International Rescue Committee, and I'm also on the advisory board for Amani Transformational Foundation. So emotional intelligence is not normally something that is taught to us in schools. It's some of us may be lucky enough to have elements of it directed at us, things like someone saying to us, for example, think before you act, or you don't have to say everything that comes into your mind. So someone may have said that to us, but it's not something that's normally taught to us in schools per se. So I hope that as we go through this session, we'll have a better understanding of why emotional intelligence is important and how we can build on our own emotional intelligence. So we're having technical issues, but if you go to the next slide, yeah. So we have a session plan. We're going to have an overview of what emotional intelligence is in terms of definitions, thinking through what emotional intelligence is, but also what emotions, moods, and feelings are. And then we're also going to briefly touch on IQ, which is something all of us may already be aware of. We're going to briefly have an overview of the science around emotional intelligence, why it matters, and how we can develop emotional intelligence. I think throughout the session, we'll also try to see practical examples and also have some reflections of our own as we go through the session. So next slide, please. So emotional intelligence is defined as our capacity to be aware of and in control of how we express emotion. So we have this quotation from McKee and Co., which says that great leaders are resonant leaders. They manage their emotions well. They are awake, aware, and attuned to themselves, others, and the world around them. They give of themselves in the service of the cause, but they also care for themselves, engaging in renewal to ensure they can sustain resonance over time. I think this is a really good way of describing in a nutshell what emotional intelligence is. When we're emotionally intelligent, we have the ability to perceive and express emotions. We incorporate emotions in our thought processes, and we work with emotions to understand and reason about things. And we're also able to control our emotions within ourselves and how we are with others. So it really is a concept that relates to how we understand and manage ourselves and how we relate to others. And this concept was popularized by a psychologist called Daniel Coleman, who defined emotional intelligence. And it's something that, as you dig deeper into this subject, you'll be learning more about how he did this and his work around emotional intelligence overall. So if you go to the next slide, so thinking of emotions, moods, and feelings, let's discuss this also by typing in the chat function of this Zoom call. First of all, why is it useful and important to understand what you're feeling, and how do feelings affect your mood? If people can just post that questions, those answers there. But really thinking about emotions, an emotion is a mental state that arises spontaneously rather than through conscious effort. And it's often accompanied by physiological or behavioral changes in the body. And then we have a mood, which is a particular state of mind or outlook at a particular time. And we have a feeling, which is an emotional state or reaction and awareness by your body. So our emotions and moods tend to be contagious, and emotional intelligence gives us vocabulary to express our emotions, moods, and feelings. And all of these affect our actions, they affect our interactions, and also affect our connections. So yeah, just maybe if we can take 2 minutes to think through why is it useful and important to understand what you're feeling and how do those feelings affect your mood. If people can just type in the chat function, and then we can talk through it. Is it useful to understand what you're feeling? And do feelings affect your mood? How do they affect your mood? So Richard has typed, what are those positive emotions required to manage people or challenge at workplaces? Yes. So I think what we're going to talk through today is really important, not just in the workplace, but also how we relate with people on a day-to-day basis. Though here we're talking about leadership skills, but it's also about our personal life. Yeah, and it's important to understand our modes in order to manage them. Very important, Jennifer. Yeah, so let's keep using the chat function and share what we are reflecting on as we go through this session. Okay, so let's move on. Next slide, please. So we have what we call primary emotions and secondary emotions. What psychology is telling us is that primary emotions tend to add value to what we're doing, whereas secondary emotions hinder us. So primary emotions happen in the moment, so they're in real time, they move us to action, they're usually advantageous and they add value. So things like joy, happiness, fulfillment, fear, shame, sadness, guilt, frustration, and so on, disappointment. And then we have secondary emotions, which tend to be complicated and they tend to build up and they can hinder us. So you have things like disapproval, hatred, coldness, hostility, low self-esteem, depression, jealousy, anxiety. So primary emotions are our immediate reactions and they motivate us to do something. When we experience secondary emotion, we need to figure out why we feel the way we feel and what we can do to do away with those emotions. So primary emotions are in the moment emotions. They're responses that may be responses to a pleasant or unpleasant stimulus, and they happen as a direct result of an external factor that then affects us emotionally. And they usually occur in close proximity to the event that brought them on. So it's very immediate. And they're important because they provide us with information about our current situation and how we can get ready or motivated to act in a certain way. And then when we look at secondary emotions, these are really things that do not help us to achieve particular, we can't achieve things when we focus on secondary emotions. They do not make us a better person. They disguise themselves by making us think we'll be better if we listen to that inner voice. I think we have someone off mute. And we find that secondary emotions actually destroy our sense of self and they can demoralize us. So in the long term, if we tend to focus a lot on our secondary emotions, it can become a pattern that's dysfunctional and not very good for us. So really thinking about how we handle secondary emotions is very important as we talk about emotional intelligence. Next slide, please. I think we jumped one. Yeah, so what relates to emotional intelligence? So we have things like executive competencies like adaptability, decision-making, change management. We have interpersonal communication, which is the process by which people exchange information, feelings, and meaning through verbal and non-verbal communication. We have relationship management, which is the ability to maintain good and positive relationships. We have social intelligence, which is the capacity to know ourselves and also to know others. And then we have leadership development, which is a process which helps us to expand the capacity of individuals to perform in leadership roles. So all these things are related to emotional intelligence. So now let's go deeper into emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence helps us to intelligently understand, to interpret and take action on emotions, feelings, and thoughts that we have. And this relates to social skills, self-awareness, self-regulation, empathy, and motivation. So it is the deciding factor between finding and living our life's passion, or if we just let time pass away. And it is also the deciding factor that determines that what we make out of life. Like there's this saying that if life hands us lemons, do we make lemonade or we just look at the lemons? Yeah. So do we get stuck in bitterness or we get past that and do other things to overcome what we are going through? So this is what in brief is defined as emotional intelligence. Next slide, please. So it's important to understand that all emotion is all emotion is functional. So whether your own behaviors or the behaviors of others are driving positive or negative emotions, all this is impactful. And before you apply new practices or strengthen your ability to lead with emotional intelligence, you need to assess your current emotions and consider the outcomes you want. So it's important to know what the positive emotions are and what the negative emotions are. So positive emotions tend to broaden us, so support us to be resilient. They improve our thinking, and they undo negative emotions, they build new skills in us, and then they create that psychological capital that we need. Whereas negative emotions can be a threat to us in terms of how we lead our lives, how we relate with others, but also it means that we have to pay attention to a certain issue when we have negative emotions. And negative emotions can be a mechanism of learning, like if we have negative emotions and we reflect on them, then we can learn something from the process as well. Next slide, please. So it's also important to note that emotional intelligence is not certain things. It's not about being smart. It's not IQ, like we all know about IQ, intelligence quotient, and we shall talk a little bit more about this. It's not about controlling other people's emotions or manipulating other people. And it has nothing to do with being an introvert or an extrovert. Next slide, please. So there's a difference between IQ and EQ. Someone said IQ gets you into the door, EQ helps you to stay. So like, for example, if you're talking of a situation where you apply for a job, you may be really brilliant and you pass the interview and you get in and you start the job, but do you actually get to stay at that job? It may be a leadership role. You apply for something, you're interviewed, you get a leadership role, but do you actually succeed in that role as a leader? So it's important to make that differentiation. Your emotional intelligence can have a greater influence on your success in life than your IQ. IQ can predict school grades, and it peaks in our late teens. So like, yeah, a few people on this call are youth, and we are at a peak in terms of getting to the highest point in our IQ. Whereas with emotional intelligence is something we can always build on as we move along. It's really important to recognize that strong relationships are key when we are leaders. When we have developed our emotional intelligence, we can easily build more lasting, stronger, positive relationships with our managers and also with our colleagues, but also with other relationships in our lives like family, friends, and so on. When we're talking about leadership, it's important to note that influencing others is a critical role in a leader's role, is critical in a leader's role. So you may be trying to convince your manager about something or persuading colleagues to join you on a certain venture. So put in a certain way, it's very important to think about emotional intelligence as your ability to spot hot buttons as they arise, and you have a strong inner voice that guides you away from knee-jerk reactions towards positive responses. And ultimately, it can help you to be even more effective in terms of your talent, in terms of your profession, which in the end benefit your career as well. So as we can see, emotional intelligence has a lot going on in terms of key considerations, but also the benefits of having what we call emotional intelligence. Next slide, please. Yeah, so I think we've talked a lot about this already in terms of why it matters. So just to summarize, emotional intelligence enhances better communication, it improves our personal relations, it helps us to coach others better, manage change. In terms of dealing with conflict, if we're emotionally intelligent, then we're able to do that better. It improves our productivity and helps us when we're building teams. It also promotes a better work environment if people around us and ourselves have a certain level of emotional intelligence. And also when it comes to people who are, have people we work with or people who work for us, retaining employees is made easier for us. So it really helps us in our strive for success, in our living, working, learning, and social interactions with ourselves and with others. So how do leaders exhibit emotional intelligence? So there's actions that have been identified as exhibiting high emotional intelligence, which include things like resilience, listening skills, being empathetic, being courageous, being inclusive in how we lead, being consistent and confident, and then also having a long-term perspective, having a good sense of humor, being respectful and flappable, being flexible, being patient, and also having a strong problem-solving skills. And then we have actions that exhibit low emotional intelligence, like a leader who blames others, who's unforgiving, defensive, who stonewalls, like doesn't want to listen, who's judgmental and exclusive, who has a bad sense of humor or poor problem-solving skills, leaders who are rigid and impatient with those they work with. We have people who have short-term perspective, people who are disrespectful, who are cowardly and inconsistent. So these are some of the traits that psychologists have identified in terms of high EQ and low EQ. Okay, so let's go on to the next slide. So yeah, just thinking about when emotional intelligence is lacking. We all know people who are like, yeah, what is listed on this slide. Just didn't get it, or always say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing. So there's all those traits, but then it leads to chaos, whether it's in the work environment or the social environment. So we have an environment where there's no learning culture, where there's increased stress for everybody, where people don't adjust to change, there's no innovation, and generally negative attitudes and no focus on what is happening in the work environment. And so this is all related to emotional intelligence. We've had, I'm sure, in our work experience, situations where it's very toxic at work, where people are talking about each other and things like that. So this is generally what we see in terms of where emotional intelligence is lacking. But fortunately for us, we can develop emotional intelligence, and the short form of it is that you can listen to yourself and your emotions, you can identify and classify those emotions. You can also note the difference between having and acting on emotions. You can learn to distract, take time to note your impact on others. So there's this thing where people will be like, oh, I received this email, it was very annoying, and I responded immediately, versus someone who will be like, okay, I wrote the response, but I kept it in my inbox, and then I reflected it on it, and then changed it, and then sent it. So yeah, taking that time to reflect on how you're going to respond to a certain situation is really important. And then setting goals, both internally within yourself, but also you could write down those goals in terms of what you want to do, where you want to go. And then just slow down, think and act. Yeah, don't always act very fast. But we're going to go through this in more detail next. But before that, I don't know, Kenneth and Dorcas, if there are any questions we should answer.
Yes, there's one question in the chat from Anthony. How can you determine whether you're emotionally intelligent or manipulative? How do you determine the delicate balance?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, how do you determine whether you're emotionally intelligent or manipulative? Exactly. So is manipulation, according to that list of, we had that list of, the high emotional intelligence and low emotional intelligence. And I think manipulation would fall in that category of where we have secondary emotions, right? Where we have, why would someone be manipulative? What is it because they're anxious? Is it because they're not listening or they're paranoid? What's causing the manipulation? Do they disapprove of the person that they are leading? So they try and manipulate them. Yeah, so thinking about that in terms of, what is the primary emotion that's causing us to act? What is the secondary emotion that's causing us to act? Might be a way to go to determine that balance. Dorcas, is emotional intelligence inborn or learned? What do people think? Can you learn emotional intelligence?
Personally, I actually think it is both. Can I be heard?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, personally, I actually think it is both. People are just born with different degrees of emotional intelligence, and some have a high level of emotional intelligence and some have a lower one. So the ones with a lower level can learn to improve their understanding of what emotional intelligence is, or their emotions and how to process them. But inherently, I don't think anyone is born completely without emotional intelligence. There's just levels. But I needed clarification from you on what you think.
Yeah, I think, yeah, well, I was thinking when I was asked to give this talk and I said yes without thinking, I reflected on my emotional intelligence as I was preparing for this topic. I think there are things that were always like in terms of intuition, in terms of how we are raised, our life experiences that can build a certain level of emotional intelligence as we grow. But I think a lot of the time we learn as we go, I would say learn on the job or learn through life's experiences and build on that. There's always this thing called the benefit of hindsight. Like if I acted like this, then that would have happened that way. Yeah. Yes, so Doris is saying one can be aware and work on it. Yes, and to be emotionally intelligent, you have to be intentional and work on it as you deal with people and life situations. Yes, Jennifer. And Richard is saying, what makes one not listen to him or herself while in a debate or in a meeting? There are certain people who don't listen to anyone. They're already thinking of what they are going to say next. During conversations. And we're going to talk about this as we go through how we develop emotional intelligence. So if you can move to the next slide, please. Okay, so according to psychologists, there are 9 steps to develop emotional intelligence. So the first one is to understand what it is, which we have done, we have started to do this morning, and then to learn to identify what they call the amygdala hijack. We get to know what the 4 quadrants of emotional intelligence are and how we work around those. We identify our own values, and then we identify what our key values are to gain self-awareness. Then the 6th step is developing our self-management strategies. And the 7th is to gain social awareness, also to learn to identify other people's values. And then the 8th step is to practice relationship management, especially when there's conflict. And then the 9th step is don't be afraid to show or discuss emotions. So these are the 9 steps that are recommended by psychologists in terms of how we develop emotional intelligence. But let's go briefly through them one by one. So there's this amygdala hijack, which is an immediate overwhelming emotional response, which is usually out of proportion to the stimulus that has triggered it. And just to go back a bit, the amygdala is a section of the brain which perceives threats and triggers a fight-flight response. So this is the science I was talking about in terms of emotional intelligence. So we have that fight or flight response. And this happens in the section of our brain called the amygdala. And when the amygdala hijacks our reactions, it means that it's taking over how we act. This is something that was developed during the formation of our brain, and it was more developed in our ancestors, our human ancestors, that developed this response to deal with threats and dangerous situations. So like, for example, we had the Stone Age, the Iron Age, people had a stronger amygdala response when they had to deal with a lot of threats and dangerous situations. But over time, our cerebral cortex in the brain has evolved and has given us ability to reason logically. So it means that these days, in the world we live in, our cerebral cortex does most of that for us, whereas in previous times it used to be the amygdala. However, the amygdala can still take over and work automatically. So there are going to be times when, we have threats that, for example, work stressors or life stressors or being anxious about certain social situations may arise, where we have the amygdala taking over how we reason, how we act. And because it cannot differentiate between physical and emotional threats, then we generally tend to act beyond what we would act in a logical situation. So this is called the amygdala hijack. And it's useful for life-threatening situations. Like, for example, if you see a car coming towards you, that impulse to jump away is very useful to have. But in certain situations, the hijack may cause us to react in a very intense emotional way, which is out of proportion to the situation that we're in. And that is what psychologists call the amygdala hijack. Basically, it hijacks how we work, how we think, how we act. For example, when a coworker is trying to talk to you while you're trying to concentrate on work, and the amygdala takes over and you respond to them by shouting at them. Yeah, that's one example of where it takes over. So in brief, that is the amygdala hijack. And if we go to the next slide, it's about how we learn to identify this. So it's very important for us to identify that hijack by naming the emotion, using a 6-second rule, controlling your breathing if something angers you, changing the setting, move away from what's causing you to have that reaction, sharing the mental load. So we always say it's important to talk through things with people, share with someone what you're feeling, what emotions you have, what fears you have, and then practice mindfulness. Thinking about using mindfulness in terms of slowing down, thinking through things, and practicing meditation and things like that. So with the 6-second rule, it can take a chemical involved in amygdala response to dissipate if you use the 6-second rule. So if you delay response, then it allows you to actually calm down and do things differently. Breathing can be a very powerful tool. So for example, if you have a very strong emotion to something and you slow down and take deep breaths, it allows you to calm down. Changing the setting, in a stressful situation, if you're in an environment that's stressful, moving away from that environment, taking a walk, coming back will help as well. So that's the science of the amygdala response and emotional intelligence. Then we have the 4 quadrants of emotional intelligence. So here, to achieve a deeper understanding of emotional intelligence, we have Daniel Goleman's 4 quadrants. So this is a psychologist that coined the term emotional intelligence. He talks about self-awareness. So this involves recognizing your emotions and your impact. What is the impact of those emotions on you? Then knowing your strengths and limitations, and possessing a strong sense of confidence in yourself, is very important. And then self-management comes by using your self-awareness to regulate how you manage your emotions. Self-awareness relates to how you handle your relationships and your ability to feel empathy for the needs and feelings of others. So you have self-awareness that leads to self-management, and then you have social awareness that's related to the needs and feelings of others. And then you have relationship management, which refers to your skill and ability to induce desirable responses in others. So whether you're being an inspirational leader, whether you're being a catalyst for change, whether you're trying to influence or negotiate or resolve conflicts. So all these things work together in terms of being self-aware, self-management, social awareness, and also relationship management. Next slide, please. The next step is how we identify our values. So we all have values that are important to us and related to the self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, and relationship management aspects as well. Our values are beliefs or ideals that are desirable to us, or some things that may be undesirable. Things like kindness, respect, responsibility, friendship, community, compassion, religion, timekeeping, competency. Those are all values. And the values we have tend to have a strong influence on our behavior and how we adapt to situations and what we do in certain situations. Our values help us to make decisions. They determine what our priorities are and also how we interact successfully with others. So when we use our values to guide our lives, we tend to be more effective and we're happy. However, when our values are compromised or challenged, then it's likely that we will have what that dreaded amygdala hijack thing will happen to us. So that's one of the steps in terms of how we develop emotional intelligence. What is our value? And then when we go to the next slide, thinking about how we identify our key values to gain self-awareness, yeah? So because values trigger both positive and negative emotions, the first step to becoming self-aware is to identify our values. So in the previous slide, we talked about examples of values, but I'm sure all of us on this call have particular values that are important to us. So I would like us to take 2 minutes to think about our top 5 values and think about like, how do those top 5 values guide your decision-making and priorities? And then how do these values manifest themselves in your work during your work life? And would your colleagues or your direct reports agree with these top 5 values, or do you think they would think they are not useful, or maybe they have different values? Let's take 2 minutes to have individual self-reflections on this. So you've thought of your top 5 values that guide your decision-making and your priorities. How do those values relate in your work life on a day-to-day basis?
If my values do not align to my day-to-day work, what does that mean?
Good morning.
Morning.
Yes, we have joined the team, but unfortunately, we're trying to connect our audio to a loudspeaker, which has become so unfortunate.
Oh, welcome, Ashanti. I'm sorry to hear that you're having technical difficulties joining.
Okay, so has everyone thought through what their 5 values are and how their values manifest themselves in your work life? Sandra, I think I'm just trying to think, like, if your values don't manifest yourself in your work life, Are you happy then in that work life if those are your values? Yeah, I'm just thinking this is like an open conversation. Yeah. Do people have the same experience in terms of values not manifesting in work life?
Yes, Lillian, can I come in? This is Anthony.
Yes, Anthony.
Yes, thank you. Well, I just wrote down like 3 values. One of them is listening, because I do quite a lot of listening to other people. But the challenge that I've observed over the years is that in listening to others, you tend to find yourself giving too much time to others expressing themselves, unless in perhaps, guiding to a focused, solution-driven conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, in my workplace, they know that I listen a lot, and I always get many people coming to my office for that. By the times they come and they find you in the middle of a very important assignment, but because you can send them off, so you give them time. But even the time you give them, they're not making any sense of what they're trying to tell you. So you find yourself boiling in there, but yet you don't want to disappoint them by saying, get out, I have work to do, I'm busy, can you come back next time? So I find myself almost struggling on how do I ensure that when they come in, they are focused to what they want to say, but I also don't hurt them by saying, you're not making sense to me and you're wasting my time. Just recently, there's a colleague who came to my office. I was really preparing an important statement for my boss. And he was urgently saying he needed to speak to me. But when I gave him 10 minutes, he made no sense in 10 minutes. He had wasted my time, yet I'd given him an opportunity, and yet I felt I couldn't just send him out of my office. How do you deal with all this? You're trying to balance, understanding the others, applying your values in your workplace, but at the same time, you find yourself sometimes, being disappointed in that context. Back to you, Lillian.
Yeah, thanks for that, Anthony. And I can relate with that situation. And recently I had advice from someone in HR, because I have 6 direct reports, and I have one-to-one calls with them. And it's like, yeah, basically listening, and sometimes you don't finish all the points that you need to go through. So what I was advised was to use a one-to-one meeting brief, whereby they send like things, updates they want to tell me, what's going to come the next few weeks, and then any issues they want to discuss in terms of support needs, and then so it has a 4 quadrants, this format they use, and I find it has really improved in terms of the efficiency of the meetings I have, where I read the notes beforehand, and then it's not about like talking when the meeting happens. It's about identifying solutions to the issues they've identified in that format. Yeah, so I can share that format. Yeah, but it has made a big difference to me in terms of how meetings happen now with colleagues. I don't know if others have had similar experiences. Incidentally, listening is important in emotional intelligence. So yeah, it's not something we're going to run away from, but yeah, how do we use time efficiently? How do we address consent versus consensus? Yeah.
Ashanti had something to say. Ashanti, go ahead.
Thank you so much. Right now, we are being able to connect the students of BEZA and other youth available at our office in Youth Center. And I'm happy and glad to tell you that they're also part of our discussion today. And hopefully they'll also learn a lot from the program of today and also be able to share with the school, other school students that they have left back at the school. Thank you. We apologize for the delays joining you on the webinar. I can also share with them. They're glad and also happy to listen from you.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Ashanti.
Thank you, Ashanti, and you're welcome to the youth in Adjumani who are joining this webinar. And yes, Richard will share the PowerPoint presentation after the call. Yeah, Jennifer, you said that EQ is not extroversion or introversion. However, these at times affect how we relate with people. How can we manage these to be emotional intelligence without being misunderstood? That's a really good and big question. So according to psychologists, it's possible to have EQ whether you're an introvert or an extrovert. And I recently learned, I did a personality test, and I learned that even if I'm an introvert, there are certain things I can do to succeed as a leader, despite being an introvert, which was quite encouraging. So yeah, I can share that as well. I think it's if all of us can do that personality test and see how it helps us also to take us through how we address certain things within ourselves, whether we're introverts, extroverts, or in the middle. So that's a really good question, Jennifer. Okay, so let's move on. So what they advise as well is to keep a notebook or a journal of our emotions and basically our behaviors as relates to each of our emotions. So for example, if I'm angry, what do? I yell. If I'm sad, I cry. So if you make a journal, then it helps you to see, yeah, this is the trend I'm going towards. What do I need to change? And then if you do this over 30 days, you will experience, you start to identify what triggers things for you, which of your values were triggered, and then think about how you alter your reaction to that same situation in the future. So this is something I learned this week as I was preparing for this topic. And I think it's something I'm going to also take up and use, yeah. And then the next slide is talking about self-management. So now we are going down the steps in terms of how to develop emotional intelligence. So to develop your self-management, you need to think of strategies to manage your emotions in a positive way when your values are challenged. So there are 7 things that they advise us to do. Once you've developed self-awareness, the next step is try to manage your emotions in a positive way. So for example, think of the last time you experienced an emotional trigger at work. How did you react? Did you lose your temper and regret it later? Did you have a physical reaction, such as maybe your heart was beating faster? And then we have self-management, which allows us to improve our self-esteem, our goals, our relationships, and values. And then we have, in terms of self-management skills, thinking about things that can have an immediate impact on how you manage yourself, your well-being, as well as your relationships. So the first thing they say is that we need to embrace our strengths. We need to understand what our internal strengths are and how they reflect on what we do best. So we understand our strengths and we play to our strengths. For example, if we identify our strengths when we're working in teams, if you're good at keeping your group on task when working in a class project or working on a work project, then yeah, embrace that strength and make it even bigger. The ability to keep your group focused requires the same skills necessary to keep yourself on track. So how do you use that strength you have, for example, in terms of teamwork, group work, for your own benefit as well? And then adapting to challenges. Sometimes we have challenges, and to be a good leader and to have emotional intelligence, we need to approach challenges with a healthy attitude. So although we may not anticipate everything that life throws at us, the important thing is that we can control how we tackle things, yeah? So when we're planning, we need to acknowledge that challenges may happen. How do we identify those challenges and act on them? How do we create action plans to resolve problems? So that's really important. And then the third one is how we nurture our relationships with others. So an important part of managing ourselves is managing our relationships. And our personal and professional relationships are a part of what makes us who we are. So we have the responsibility to hold ourselves accountable in our relationships. How do we interact with others? How do we interact in a way that strengthens us or hinders our relationships? And then setting goals for ourselves is really important. Leaders need to improve themselves continuously. So set a goal in terms of like, yeah, where do you want to be in 2 years, in 5 years, in 10 years? And think through how do you achieve that goal going forward, whether it's a 2-year goal, a 5-year goal, a 10-year goal. Make it attainable in terms of how you set your goals and invest time to reach the goal that you've set yourself. And then understand your emotions. So be skilled in regulating your emotions, be aware of your feelings and how your feelings relate to relationships and attitudes. For example, leaders are able to recognize when they are frustrated during a conflict with another individual, and you can ask for a break in the conversation and then come back to it later. So that's also understanding your emotions. Be able to identify and understand your emotions and how they enable you to interact with others in a healthy and productive way. And then there's being patient. So be patient with yourself. Like I always say, be kind to yourself and be patient with yourself and others. It's very important in self-management. You need to have a strong sense of patience. And also patience works in tandem with regulating your emotions and requires practice. It's a practice skill, as people say. Patience is a practice skill. So remember that everyone works at their own pace in their own way. So like when you're a leader in a team or working together with others, always remember that we're not all the same. So we have to understand that we can't control everything, and we need to recognize that reaching our goals may take time and be patient as we move forward. And then the last one is prioritizing our well-being. This is something we always forget about. So we need to improve our self-management skills in terms of self-care. Having a healthy attitude and productive relationships, having a healthy lifestyle is very important as well. So that's self-management, which is also a key aspect of emotional intelligence. And then to gain social awareness, we have to learn to identify other people's values. So what are other people's values and how do those values reflect in their behaviors? And then how do their values relate to your own values? Do their values appear to guide their decision-making and priorities? So there may be a clash of values that can lead to conflict. So thinking about, this is this person's values, this is my values. Our values may not be the same. So how do we work together to be successful in what we are doing? And then you also have to try and identify the level of emotional intelligence that others that you're working with do. For example, if you are hiring someone for a job or recruiting someone to be part of your team, sometimes in interviews we ask, like, for example, how do people adapt to difficult situations? How do they manage conflicting priorities? When that question is asked, it's usually not to identify whether people are anxious or not. It's really to see how they adapt and how they are socially aware, how they're able to to look at things differently in different situations in our workplace. So that social awareness is really important as well. And then the next one is relationship management. So how do you practice relationship management and conflict management? I think as leaders, this is something we can't run away from, but also something that's very uncomfortable most of the time. So we know that becoming self-aware won't happen overnight, but once you're self-aware, you're able to manage your emotions. And because you have a strong understanding of what others are experiencing, that's the social awareness, in the end, you're able to manage relationships in a more emotionally intelligent way. So when it comes to relationship management and conflict management, thinking about how you manage conflict, how you basically think through, for example, a scenario where a manager comes to you from another team or a team member comes to you and wants you to pay attention to them immediately. And this is someone, for example, this is a scenario I'm giving you, someone who tends to mishandle their affairs and then wants you to deal with them urgently in order to solve the problem that they have caused. So in that case, do you get impatient with this person, or do you ask them to give you time and you think about it and how you handle the situation? And then how do you stop this from happening again and again? Also thinking about like the future in terms of that relationship management. Do you want this person to keep coming back with the same problem, or do you want to find a durable solution to this challenge this person presents in the relationship? So I don't know. I'm sure all of us in this call have had to manage a relationship or conflict. So it would be interesting to hear people's thoughts on that as well. So the final one is about managing or showing emotions. Don't be afraid to discuss or show emotion, because leading with vulnerability is seen as a strength. It's seen as a strength of an authentic leader, an honest leader, and this tends to move people and achieve results. So be authentic, embrace discomfort, admit mistakes, and also listen actively and openly to what people are saying. So as a manager, it's important to show that you're open to talking about different difficult situations and also emotions that those situations evoke. And it's okay to ask people like, how are you doing? How are you feeling? That can open the door to important conversations with colleagues and also with people we are supervising, especially when it's a high stress situation. So as a manager, do you know how your direct reports are feeling? Ask and listen carefully to their answers and then react to those answers. In terms of authenticity, it's the daily practice of letting go of who we think we're supposed to be and embracing who we are. So being, that authenticity is really important. Embracing discomfort means, being vulnerable when it's necessary to, when things are uncomfortable. So embrace that discomfort and use it as an opportunity for growth and learning. If you make a mistake as a leader, yeah, it's really good to admit that mistake so that people see that, yeah, it's good to, it's okay to make mistakes and learn from mistakes. And so by doing that, you're actually creating a culture of openness and learning within your team. And then listening actively and openly. Yeah, so in terms of like feedback that people are providing, active listening, open listening is really good for building trust and fostering a culture of responsible vulnerability within your team. So I think that was the end. I just wanted us to take the last few minutes to think about examples of emotional intelligence or lack of emotional intelligence in use. What was the situation and behavior, if we go to the next slide, that required you to use emotional intelligence? And how did you react? And what was the result of your reaction? And then, yeah, after we've had this discussion today, what would you have done differently?
Thank you so much. I do have a question, and we have about 8 minutes to go. So hopefully we'll get through this exercise. But I do have a question because we've been joined by students of Beza High School in Germany, and most of them are in their teenage years. And as you know, with teenage years comes a lot of hormones and emotions. So what kind of advice would you give to students? And I know that most of them have just joined halfway through this webinar, but kind of like a quick overview of what would be the key takeaways for teenagers with regard to this subject.
I want to throw that question back to our young people on the call who have gone past teenage. We have Kenneth, we have Dorcas. What advice would you give your teenage self? It's been so many years since I was a teenager. Kenneth, can I put you on the spot with Dorcas?
Yeah, it's all right. It's also been very many years for me since I was a teenager. Okay, not that many, I'm joking. But I think in terms of emotional intelligence, the thing I would tell myself is to just allow myself to understand the people around me, to understand that not everybody would act the way I want them to act, but to also just be empathetic towards them because everybody is going through something. Sometimes somebody can be rude or mean to you or not considerate, but maybe it's because you're going through something. So I just told myself to allow people more grace, to try and be more understanding, but also to just be empathetic in the way I approach them, no matter how they have approached me. And at the end of the day, I think when you try the empathetic approach, it always works because at the end of the day, people end up coming around. And I think it has also it has also helped me a lot in my leadership because so many times as a leader, you have to deal with problems that people are bringing towards you, but they may not always come to you in the best spirit, or they may not always be understanding of the explanation you offer. So emotional intelligence is very important because it teaches you how to deal with people when they come in a particular way or when they have a particular problem. But I've also found that so many times, sometimes people just want to be heard. They want to be listened to, no matter how angry they are. And just giving them that opportunity to express themselves without you reacting to maybe how you perceive they have approached you or talked to you always helps to just smooth things over. So I think that's the advice I'd give myself, maybe looking back.
Wow, that's great.
Thanks, Kenneth.
Hello?
Yes.
Can I say an example of how I've used my emotions negatively at workplace?
Sure, Richard, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. There was time at workplace I'd planned with my donor to have a visit at the field. And then I made the necessary arrangements with the fleet manager, cars being allocated. So the following morning, at the rang, my donor, he came, arrived at the office. Then as I was getting out the car, I didn't see the car that has been allocated. And then only to be, when I came to the fleet manager, he tells me, this car, I've sent it to Yumbe. Say, hey, gentlemen, I've planned for this car a week ago, knowing that I'm having a donor. How does this show to the donor? And at the blink of a minute or second, I don't know, the way I responded to this guy was as if I was talking to, I don't know how many thousands of people. I really raised my voice and I lost control. I think the donor also heard of my voice, but when I saw him now getting towards us, I just left that scene. I went towards him. Then they told him, I think we have problem with the car. And then he had to call from the office for a car, and then we use that car of the donor. But that was so bad. But I think I've learned two things. One, sometimes because we are not socially aware of our emotional intelligence, people sometimes also take us for granted at workplace or in any other environment that in which we operate. Because I think my reaction also helped somehow our manager to streamline certain things. Yeah, of course, I apologized after at the return from the field, but when I went home, reflect on all this, I really felt bad that I shouted that much. But I think also the negative emotions in lives sometimes propel certain positive things that we might not be aware of. Thank you.
Well, thank you for sharing that. My perspective always is that life is a learning journey. So although you consider that situation to be negative, I think you learned something from it, and that's what's important, so that in future you know how to better respond. Does anyone have any questions or anything they want to share? Situation or behavior that required you to use emotional intelligence. How did you react? What was the result? And after today, what would you have done differently?
Thank you so much. Glad to join the team. I myself have also had experiences of emotional disturbances. Sometimes you find at work, at your workplace, a colleague just, I don't know whether it's naturally when she normally does not talk to you, even though you greet them, they just ignore you. And you're supposed to work as a team. And communication is a key thing for teamwork. So you find, how do you, I would like to know, how do you improve your relationship with a colleague you're supposed to work together with, who does not want you even near them, and they don't want to partnership with you? You can literally see it from their from their physical communication, the face. you just can't approach that person. And whenever you're trying to talk to the person, they act like they don't give you the attention. They're looking somewhere, or they're talking to someone, or they are busy doing something, and yet you're supposed to communicate with this person. So some of us go through such kind of challenges also at workplaces where teamwork is also needed. So I would like to ask Doctor, what do you do for such a colleague? Thank you.
Yeah, so there may be emotional intelligence issues, there may be personality issues as well. In terms of that, I think it's going to be about you yourself and how you act, how you respond to the behavior. So my advice or guidance would be to, first of all, focus on yourself and what you can do, what you can control. And then if there's conflict in the situation, how you manage that conflict, or whether you bring in a supervisor or somebody else as a third party to help you manage the conflict. Thanks for the question, Ashanti. I think we are at time. I'll hand back to Sandra.
Well, thank you, everyone. I think we are over time, and I'm sorry. I would like to apologize that we've gone over time. I think this was an interesting topic, and I want to see this as a starting point for a discussion around emotional intelligence. Lillian has posted the personality test in the chat. So this is something that if you have the opportunity, please take the test, and it will kind of show you what are the areas of emotional intelligence that you need to work on. Personally, I've taken one of those tests before, and it helped me to kind of identify 3 key areas. And I actually had to work on those three areas over a period of like a year, and kind of documenting my process and what I'm learning and how I'm improving. So I'd really encourage everybody to take the test, and also to identify at least 3 areas and then to work on them over time. And what also could be helpful is getting like an accountability partner. After you've taken the test, find somebody who you can throw ideas back at, and who you can share your journey and who can give you feedback. That also helped me a lot along in my journey to learning about myself and how I can improve my relationships with the people around me. And I see that we are about to close, but Ashanti, I think you said there's questions from the students. The question is,
we had one from the student asking how to manage emotional situations. It can be anger and conflict among students. How do you deal with situations where you have emotional challenges with your fellow classmates? Thank you. Another one.
Thank you, Ashanti. Yeah, that's a good question and a very big question. I think it would be important to make time to actually get questions and have a discussion with the students about this. So yeah, I don't know what options we have. Sandra, can we keep the line open and respond to the students' questions after we close?
Yes, we can do that. So if anyone needs to drop off, feel free to drop off, and we can kind of stay with the students and answer their questions, because they joined in over an hour after we started. So we'll give them an opportunity to ask their questions. But I think we have finished the main presentation, and if you need to drop off, feel free to drop off. If you would like to stay on and listen, also feel free to do so. So thank you everybody for joining.
Yes, Sandra, can I propose one thing?
Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I first of all appreciate this, and I thank you for always sharing this. Although it's remotely done, I think we are getting there. So my proposal is the next webinar that we are organizing, is it able for me to maybe talk to 1 or 2 radio stations here, the local radio stations, where then find out whether these things can be linked up so that people can also benefit from this, the local people. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. I think that can be arranged.
Okay, then have a good day. Bye.
Okay, thank you, Richard.
Yeah, we'll be waiting for the PowerPoint presentation. It has been so insightful. Thank you.
Thank you, and maybe we should stop recording as well.